Every town has its secrets, and Elmwood was no different. Nestled in a quiet, unassuming corner of the country, it was the kind of place where life moved slowly, where people knew each other, and where nothing much ever seemed to happen. At least, that's what most people believed. But those who grew up in Elmwood knew better. They knew the stories that circulated every year as the summer days faded, and the start of school loomed closer. Elmwood High School was more than just a place of learning. It was the heart of the town. Built over a century ago, the school had seen generations of students pass through its doors. But it also held a darker history, one that was rarely spoken of aloud. Decades earlier, a tragedy had struck the school, a tragic accident that left a permanent mark on Elmwood's history. The story goes that back in the 1950s, there was a student named Lily Barnes. She was a quiet, unassuming girl, often overlooked by her classmates. Lily was the kind of student who faded into the background, excelling in her studies but never quite fitting in. She was frequently the target of bullying, something that only made her withdraw further into herself. The details of what happened next are vague, blurred by time and the reluctance of those who lived through it to speak of it. But the story that survived is chilling. One late September afternoon, Lily stayed behind after school, working alone in one of the classrooms. No one knows exactly why she was there, but what happened next became the stuff of legend. When the school's janitor found her hours later, she was dead, her body sprawled across the floor. The official cause of death was never confirmed. Some say she had a heart attack, others whispered about a fall, but the most persistent rumors were far more sinister. They claimed that Lily had been driven to her death by the relentless torment she endured, and that something darker had taken hold of her in those final moments. In the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen at Elmwood High. Students reported seeing a shadowy figure in the hallways late at night, hearing whispers when no one was around, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when they were alone. The school was never quite the same after Lily's death. It was as if her spirit had lingered, unable or unwilling to move on. Years passed, and Lily's story faded into the background, becoming one of those tales older students told the newcomers to scare them. But every so often, someone would claim to have seen Lily's ghost or hear strange noises in the old part of the school where she had died. These stories were mostly dismissed as pranks or overactive imaginations, but there were always those who believed. Enter Claire, a new student at Elmwood High. Claire had moved to Elmwood over the summer, starting her sophomore year in a new school where she knew no one. She was excited but also nervous, hoping to make new friends and fit in. But from the moment she set foot in the school, something felt off. The air seemed heavier, the shadows longer, and there was a strange, oppressive atmosphere that hung over the building. Claire had heard the stories about Lily Barnes, but she didn't give them much thought. After all, every school had its ghost stories, but as the first week of classes passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It started with little things: a cold draft in the hallway, the feeling of being watched, and strange sounds that echoed through the empty corridors after classes had ended. One day, after staying late to finish a project, Claire found herself alone in one of the older classrooms, the very one where Lily Barnes had died all those years ago. She hadn't realized this at the time, but as the minutes ticked by and the sky outside darkened, she began to feel a growing sense of unease. The room was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Suddenly, Claire heard a soft sound, like someone whispering her name. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest, straining to hear it again. For a moment, there was nothing, just the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. But then she heard it again, clearer this time, a whisper that seemed to come from right behind her. Claire spun around, but the room was empty. There was no one there. Shaken, Claire gathered her things and hurried out of the classroom, trying to tell herself that she was just imagining things. But as she walked down the deserted hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whispers followed her, growing louder, more insistent. They seemed to echo through the empty corridors, bouncing off the walls until she could barely tell where they were coming from. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the whispers stopped. Claire was on edge for the rest of the week. She couldn't explain what had happened, and every time she tried to talk about it, her friends dismissed it as just her imagination. But Claire knew what she had heard, and she could shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The school felt different, more sinister, as if something had been awakened. It wasn't long before the whispers returned. This time they came during the day, faint but unmistakable. Claire would hear them in the middle of class, just under the teacher's voice or in the hallways between periods. They always seemed to be calling her name, drawing her towards the older parts of the school where Lily Barnes had died. One afternoon, Claire found herself drawn to the school's basement, a part of the building that had been closed off for years. She had never been down there before, but something compelled her to go. The stairs creaked under her weight as she descended, and the air grew colder with each step. The basement was dark, lit only by a few dim lights that flickered overhead. The smell of damp and decay hung in the air, and the walls were covered in peeling paint and mold. As she walked deeper into the basement, Claire began to hear the whispers again, louder this time, more insistent. They echoed off the walls, seeming to come from all directions at once. Her heart raced as she followed the sound, feeling as though she were being led by an invisible force. The whispers grew louder and louder until they were a cacophony of voices, all blending together into an indistinguishable roar. And then she saw it, a faint, flickering light coming from a room at the end of the hallway. Claire hesitated, every instinct telling her to turn back. Something compelled her to keep going. As she approached the door, the light grew brighter, illuminating the room in a pale, ghostly glow. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Claire found herself standing in the same room, but everything had changed. The walls were clean and freshly painted. The desk was polished and new, and the book was gone. The air was warm and filled with the sounds of students laughing and talking. She looked around in confusion, trying to understand what had just happened. Then she saw her. Standing in the corner of the room was a girl about Claire's age, with long dark hair and a sad expression. Claire recognized her immediately. It was Lily Barnes. But this wasn't the ghostly figure she had expected. Lily looked alive, as real as any other student. She stood there, staring at Claire with a look of sorrow and desperation. Claire tried to speak, but no words came out. She felt frozen in place, unable to move or even breathe. Lily stepped forward, her eyes pleading, as if she were trying to communicate something important. But before Claire could react, the room began to change again. The walls darkened, the air grew cold, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. Suddenly, Claire was back in the dim, decaying basement, the light and warmth gone. The book lay open on the desk, its pages blank and empty. The room was silent, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. Claire backed away from the desk, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. As she turned to leave, the whispers returned one final time, a single voice standing out from the rest. It was Lily's voice, soft and clear, filled with a sadness that cut through Claire's soul. "Help me," it whispered. "Please help me." The words echoed in Claire's mind as she fled the basement, her heart pounding in her chest. She raced up the stairs, the feeling of Lily's desperate plea clinging to her like a shadow. By the time she reached the main floor of the school, she was out of breath and trembling, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. For the next few days, Claire couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the basement. The memory of Lily's voice haunted her every waking moment, and her dreams were filled with images of the girl standing alone in that dark, empty room. It was clear to Claire that Lily's spirit was trapped, unable to move on, and that she was somehow connected to whatever dark force lingered in Elmwood High. Claire knew she couldn't ignore what had happened. She felt a strange sense of responsibility, as though she had been chosen to help Lily find peace. But how? She didn't know where to start or what she could do to free the spirit of a girl who had died decades ago. She began researching the history of Elmwood High, poring over old newspaper articles, yearbooks, and any records she could find that mentioned Lily Barnes. The more she dug, the more disturbing the story became. She discovered that Lily's death had never been fully explained. The school had quickly covered up the incident, labeling it a tragic accident and moving on. But there were rumors, whispers of something far darker at play, whispers that suggested Lily had been the victim of something far more sinister than bullying. Some accounts hinted at a group of students involved in occult practices, rituals that had gone horribly wrong. Others mentioned the teacher who had taken a special interest in Lily, someone who was never quite what they seemed. Claire's investigation led her to a retired teacher who had worked at the school during the time of Lily's death. It took some convincing, but eventually the elderly woman agreed to meet with Claire. Her hands trembled as she recounted the events of that fateful day, her voice filled with a mix of fear and sorrow. She revealed that Lily had been different from the other students. Quiet, yes, but also deeply sensitive, as if she could sense things that others couldn't. The teacher admitted that strange occurrences had been happening at the school even before Lily's death. Doors slamming on their own, lights flickering, and the feeling of being watched. But after Lily died, these events intensified. The teacher believed that Lily's death had somehow amplified the dark energy that already existed in the school, trapping her spirit there along with it. The old teacher had one final piece of advice for Claire. If you want to help her, you need to confront the source of the darkness. You must go back to where it all began. Claire knew what she had to do. Gathering her courage, she returned to the basement one final time, determined to confront whatever was keeping Lily trapped. Armed with a flashlight and the knowledge she had gathered, Claire descended into the darkness, her steps echoing through the empty hallways. The whispers began almost immediately, but this time Claire was ready. She followed them, letting them guide her to the source of the dark energy. When she reached the room at the end of the hallway, the door was already open, as if it had been waiting for her. The book was still there, lying open on the desk, its pages now filled with strange symbols and markings that Claire couldn't understand. But she could feel the power emanating from it, a malevolent force that had taken root in the school long before Lily's time. Taking a deep breath, Claire stepped forward, determined to put an end to the nightmare once and for all. As she reached for the book, the air around her grew thick with energy, and the whispers intensified, swirling around her like a storm. But Claire didn't back down. She focused on Lily, on the sadness and desperation in her eyes, and willed herself to push through the fear. With a shout, Claire slammed the book shut. The whispers stopped immediately, replaced by a deafening silence. The room seemed to shudder, the walls vibrating with an unseen force. Claire felt a wave of cold wash over her, followed by a sudden, overwhelming sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from the air. The light in the room dimmed, and for a moment, Claire thought she saw Lily standing before her, smiling sadly before slowly fading away. The darkness that had plagued Elmwood High for so long was finally gone. Lily's spirit was free. After that day, the strange occurrences at Elmwood High stopped. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the school for decades lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. Claire never told anyone what had happened in the basement, but she knew that she had done the right thing. She had helped a lost soul find peace, and in doing so, she had freed the school from the dark forces that had haunted it for so long. As the new school year began, the students of Elmwood High walked its hallways unaware of the danger that had once lurked in the shadows. For them, the school was just a place of learning, a place where they would make memories and friendships that would last a lifetime. But for Claire, it was a reminder of the power of the past and the importance of never forgetting the stories that shape our lives.